Welcome to the Rural Recharge, a podcast of the Florida Farm Bureau Federation. Rural Recharge is a guided conversation that allows you to cut through the noise and multitude of information out there. You should be able to trust your sources, which is why we're a platform that comes straight from the source, the farmers and ranchers growing what we eat, wear, and use every day. Our guest today is Dr. Saundra TenBroeck, an associate professor at the Department of Animal Sciences at the University of Florida and the State Extension Horse Specialist. She is also the 2023 Woman of the Year in Agriculture and will be recognized this month at the Florida State Fair. Dr. TenBroeck has had an impressive and impactful career in Florida agriculture and has shaped countless lives as a professor at the University of Florida. Dr. TenBroeck's accomplishments, in addition to being named the 2023 Woman of the Year in Agriculture, include serving as a student and club advisor at UF, along with her professorship and extensive involvement in the Florida livestock industry, FFA, 4-H, and serving as a role model to young people throughout Florida. Dr. TenBroeck, it is a blessing, it is an honor, and I want to thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Dr. TenBroeck, give us a little bit of your background, a little history of your upbringing, and then maybe even your career path.
Sure. I'll try to sum up. I'm from Sumter, South Carolina. I was born at Shaw Air Force Base. My father was Air Force at a pretty young age. My mother quit school in 10th grade to marry my dad. That was done in those days. And she had 4 children. I was the second of 4. And we lived in a lot of different places. North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia was one of my favorite places. Georgia, which I don't remember. And then Hawaii, and we did a stint in Japan. So mostly East Coast, but a couple of exotic places. My mother had left home at 13 and lived with a foster family who were row crop farmers and dairy farmers. And my dad was an avid hunter and fisherman. He was an incredibly gifted bird dog trainer, and everywhere we lived, most of his career, he was a general's aide, and we always joke that his primary job was schmoozing the local farmers for hunting rights and training bird dogs for the general. Every base we ever lived on had a kennel full of bird dog puppies, and they built a skeet range at every base we ever lived on because of the general being an avid hunter as well. So that's kind of how I grew up, with animals and visiting South Carolina every chance we got and being on the farm. And so that was my early exposure to agriculture, but I certainly didn't get to live it. We moved to Japan when I was in middle school and only stayed a year because my parents split up. So when we came back, we resettled in South Carolina. My dad went to Korea on an isolated tour of duty so that we could come back. And we lived out in the country. We rented a big old country house that we only heated 2 of the rooms, so I slept under an electric blanket and got dressed really quick in the mornings. But I absolutely loved living there. Had a small hog farm next door. My first job was working in tobacco. I was in a barn by myself taking tobacco off the sticks. You'd pull it off the strings. And I worked on the stringer sometimes, and I got to hang it in the barn a few times. Once or twice I drove the tractor and helped crop, but that was before bulk barns, so a couple of summers doing that. The best thing I remember about all that was lunchtime, because farmers' wives really know how to cook, and they called it dinner, not lunch.
That's right.
And at supper you'd have maybe cornbread and buttermilk or something, not
That's
a
right.
big meal. So I got some really good exposure to rural America. Went to a really small school my last 2 years. And I got to go to Clemson. I was torn my senior year. I either wanted to be a PE teacher or a veterinarian because those are things I had experienced and got me excited about. And so I visited University of South Carolina in Columbia, hated Columbia. I visited Clemson and fell in love with the campus. Best university by a dam site because it's by Lake Hartwell Dam.
That's right.
And so I applied and got in. Didn't realize that it was hard to get in at the time, I think, but I did get in and went went into animal science pre-vet, and after 2 years, I started realizing other career opportunities. I worked at 4-H camp every summer, Camp Bob Cooper in Santee Cooper River, and lots of different jobs there. Lifeguarded during horse camp. I helped a little bit with that, and but I got to see county agents with kids. We had 10 weeks at camp, and we'd have several hundred kids at camp, and really appreciated what the 4-H experience and camping, and saw the role that really good county agents versus some of the lazier county agents,
Sure.
the difference in the attitudes and productivity of those kids. And I thought, wow, instead of complaining, maybe I'll go be part of this. So I started looking at opportunities to go to graduate school, because being a woman, in 1978, I was on the livestock judging team, one of 3 girls, which Clemson was pretty progressive. We didn't, Florida and Clemson, I think, had more girls than any other team in the Southeast at the time. Our dance cards were really full because there weren't very many girls. So, but I got to judge livestock. Dale Hanlon was my coach, and he was amazing. He was the Don Wakeman of Clemson. Every student that wanted to get a job in applied animal agriculture would spend some time with Mr. Hanlon, and he would help hook you up because he knew somebody everywhere. And so I was Southeast Region Block and Bridle president, which we don't do that anymore, but as regional president, I got to go to the summer animal science meetings, and I sat across the table from a gentleman who was acting department chair at LSU, and his name was Paul Humes. And so we chatted, and there was another Clemson grad at LSU at the time, and he was doing a good job, which... That's the other thing kids need to remember, is if you do a bad job and you're representing your high school or your alma mater, they equate that to other people. Same thing for your family, right? So I kind of had a foot in the door because I had a good predecessor. I got accepted to LSU to grad school when I applied. I also applied to Texas A&M and Colorado State, and I never heard back from them. But the summer, the last summer after I graduated, I was heading to LSU, and I got a call from my professor, and he said, hey, I'm interviewing at Texas A&M, but I don't know what's going to happen, but they asked me to apply. So I'll try to sum up. He got the job. They said they would accept his 2 students. So all of a sudden, myself and a girl from Wisconsin were both going to go to College Station, but he wasn't going to be there till November. So 2 weeks before I left South Carolina and went to graduate school, drove across country, that's when I found out I was going to be in College Station instead of Baton Rouge.
Oh, wow.
So I loaded up my Chevy Malibu and got a U-Haul and drove out, got settled in, and got started in grad school. The first summer that I had an assistantship, or else I wouldn't have been able to go. I paid my own way to school, and so that summer I went back to South Carolina, did horsemanship clinics every week with another girl from Clemson. So we would leave Monday morning with a university truck and trailer and drive to a county. We tied our horses to trees, fed them in feed sacks, and we stayed in a hotel. It was pretty amazing summer. Jeannie and I got along great. And we'd come back on Friday, and we'd have the weekend. So did that all summer. And then halfway through my master's program, I got to thinking about doing a PhD because I really liked teaching, and I was on a teaching assistantship. And our old state horse specialist at Clemson was applying for jobs all over the place. I go, oh, I'll get a PhD, and I'll just go back to Clemson, and I'll be the state specialist at Clemson. And he never did leave Clemson until he retired, so that was an opportunity. But I did stay for a PhD, and because of that, I had a long-term boyfriend, and he didn't want to wait for the PhD to be over, so that kind of put the icing on the cake. When a 6.5-year dating relationship ends, you're like, okay, well, I can't sing, I can't dance, I'm not getting married, I might as well complete this education and do something on a little higher level. So I say all that because I don't feel like all of these places I went was necessarily my decision. I feel like God opened doors.
Amen.
And so the year before I graduated, the University of Florida, under the direction of Roger West, advertised this youth livestock position. And it was the exact job description that I had put on a resume to apply for my long-term goals. And I thought, wow, I didn't even know this job existed, and here it is. But I wasn't close enough to being done to apply. So I kept doing my research, and Ron Gill, who's a state special, well, he's a Texas A&M retired faculty now, but he was offered the job, and a lady from Kentucky was also offered the job. They both turned it down to stay in their home states, and they've both done great things. So they decided to sit on the position and held it a year, and I was able to apply the next May. And I interviewed, and Roger West offered me the job, and I was really impressed by him. And I think who you work for is really a big part of where you should go. And I had some other opportunities. I will tell you straight up that at the time there was a lot of pressure to hire more women. So places that could find women they felt were qualified, you were going to get the nod before the men. So we had the conversation, Roger and I said, if I'm the best candidate, please offer me the job. But if you're doing this because I'm a woman, I don't want to work here. Sure. And so he assured me that he felt like I had the best packet, and he wanted me to come, and so I did. And I had the opportunity to work with Mr. Wakeman and Bill Kunkel, amazing mentor, Fred Leak, who's a hoot, and so all three of those guys are gone now. But great folks to work with. Tim Marshall was a grad student at the time, and I found out later the position had really been written for Tim Marshall, and but he was working on his PhD, so he wasn't ready. And so eventually he finished and he started working at Florida, so he and I got to be colleagues. And I talk about he and Joel McQuaig are my brothers from another mother because we are really, really close and have done a lot of things together. So that's how I came to Florida. I was given a choice between teaching and research for my other 20% assignment, because everybody that's a professor has to serve in two capacities, teaching, research, or extension. I chose teaching. And so my initial course I helped with was the Intro to Animal Science labs. I coordinated all those labs, and I had Dean Pringle, who's now the center director up in Mariana area. I had Tim Marshall, and I had Jim Drouillard, who's an amazing nutritionist. So I had a dream team of TAs, and we got a lot of cool things done. And so I started work in October of 1985 on my 29th birthday, and I've been here ever since.
Isn't that something? Well, it's an amazing thing, because it was through UF and through the youth that I met you when I was a kid in 4-H.
Thanks for making me feel old. Yeah.
You're not old. It's actually a blessing, because that impact was at the University of Florida. So tell us a little bit more about your teaching experience, because I know I've experienced that. Some of our folks, even on this radio broadcast, have experienced that. You have impacted young people through your teaching and through your 4-H. Give us a little bit more of that at University of Florida.
Sure. So I think, like I said, I started doing Intro to Animal Science labs, and I love that because every animal science student has to take the intro class, so that was exciting. When Al Warnick retired, he's a reproductive physiologist, amazing man. I took over half of the repro course. That was my area of research, so it was a logical match up, and I had coordinated all the repro labs when I was in grad school at Texas A&M. And so Mike Fields and I team taught repro, so pretty immersed, and I think I overtaught my 20%, and eventually I was changed to 60-40, and we always joke that they changed my percentage, but none of the extension work ever went away, and so you just do more. I would say over time our tools got better. Eventually we got email, eventually we got cell phones. You got to remember, when I was in grad school, we were making exams with a mimeograph machine, turning a handle, cranking out. And then all of a sudden we had copy machines. So, yeah, and my secretary, when I first started, would type my letters for me. My master's thesis was written on a typewriter. And so the transition during my PhD to PCs, as the tools got better, each person could be more efficient. And so we had to learn ways to get things done in a different way, but we could also serve a broader audience. I felt like I spent at least 3/4 of every day on the telephone, and now I feel like I spend 3/4 of every day doing emails. So,
right.
So communication is a key part of it. I got involved at the Florida State Fair. In fact, I came in October, and in February I was at the State Fair conducting the FFA and 4-H livestock judging contest. It was also the first year that the Charlie Likes Arena was open.
Oh, wow. Right.
But then in terms of teaching, I taught the intro, and then I taught repro. Got to have George and Henry Kempfer in my repro class, and I've teased, I don't remember if it was George or Henry, but I remember I did the applied repro stuff, the female and the applied, and so synchronization was part of the subject matter I had to cover. And one of those boys said, and men now, I got it, but one of them said, Dr. TenBroeck, why in the world are we having to do this synchronization stuff? And then so 5 years later, when they've graduated and they're running this humongous Kempfer cattle company, they sought me out and said something about, yeah, sorry about that. So there's a lot of things you learn in college that you have no idea that you need, and eventually you come out, oh yeah, that was kind of important. Mm-hmm. So I had some really great folks in my classes. I will tell you, being single as a female faculty member was hard. I think my job got a lot easier when I got married, because it's friendliness can be easily misinterpreted, and young ladies need to understand that when you're working in a dynamic with men, that you also have to consider their wives and being respectful in the way you relate to them, and the way you dress and the things you do. And so usually when the wives would meet me, it was all okay that I'd travel with their husbands. But until they met me, here's this blonde hair, blue-eyed 29-year-old girl who's traveling with my husband, and that was not so fun. So it put me in a different place. And I think that whole dynamic is an important thing for young ladies that are working in a male-dominated industry. Really need to consider. It's important how you're perceived, not just by your colleagues, but also by their family members. So there were probably tons of stories I could tell, but the evolution, Roger West stepped down after 2 years and went back to being a professor. Took us 2 or 3 searches to get Glenn Henry hired. He would take on administration on behalf of the Animal Science Department. And it was under his direction and Larry Connor that we were able to rejuvenate our horse program around 1995. And so as our horse program got rejuvenated and we added some more coursework and a specialization in equine, that's, I think, when my teaching role began to shift towards less overall livestock and more horse-oriented. I taught the first equine health management course. So over time, the evolution of my job went to from general studies to horse classes. And it was a logical progression. I had the background, I had the interest, I had the expertise, and so that's where we went. So after 17 years, Tim Marshall was tired of being undergrad coordinator, and he talked to Glenn, and we had a chat, and they moved me to 100% horse because we had Ed Johnson was our state extension horse specialist. He was 100% extension. But our horse industry is so large in this state, it made sense to have a second specialist. So I was 60% extension horse specialist doing youth and adult work, and Ed and I shared all of the extension outreach, and we were putting on a equine reproductive management short course, did that with Dan Sharp and folks from the vet school. And so we had some big programming. He took the state horse show, and I did the hippology and the quiz bowls, some of the more educational aspects of it. I was working at the state fair with Lisa Hinton and Mr. Wakeman and I. The three of us kind of developed what started as a steer futurity, grew into what is now the Champion Youth Program at the state fair. So it was my job to write the Skillathon manuals, which help prepare kids for the Skillathon. I did that for years. I continued serving the state fair, and I loved it. Over the years, I've helped train people to judge youth livestock shows. We've put on some symposiums and tried to develop lists of judges, because if you've ever been on a show committee, you know how hard it is to find acceptable judges, and bringing people in it from out of state sometimes makes your audience thinks they're better judges, but it's not necessarily true, and it costs a lot more money. So
Sure.
Just trying to work with the fair associations, putting the emphasis back on education, and youth development and reminding folks that's really why we have youth livestock projects. And I would consider my career a bit of an evolution. It started with Roger Rest hiring me to help reach out to young people so that they would see animal agriculture as a viable career option. And for me personally, I wanted to make sure we had a good program. Before you recruit a kid to your department and to your bachelor's degree, I wanted to feel comfortable that we had the best in the country to offer.
Right, sure.
We also wanted to know that staying in Florida is a really, really good option. And so being here a long term, I've seen the curriculum grow and change and be revised. I've seen the demographics of our students. We went from about 150 students when I first came to, there have been some years that we were over 600 undergrads. We still have a larger demographic of pre-vet versus industry-oriented youth, but I would say almost everybody that pursues animal science at one time in their life have thought about being a vet, and that's not a bad thing. But mostly it's ignorance about what other career options there are and the diversity of great opportunities to work with healthy animals and great people come. So those are the things I've tried to focus on academically. When I teach a class, I'm teaching subject matter, but I'm trying to also teach how do you find information, how do you make decisions. If you know this and you see this, what conclusions can you draw, and how does that relate to life in general? Raising kids has helped. One thing it's one thing working with other people's kids, and honestly, sometimes parents are a bigger detriment to making progress at competitive events than making the kids better. But I've also learned diplomacy, and I wish I knew then what I know now. It's scary how much I could probably have accomplished in the late 80s and early 90s if I'd known then what I know now. But that's what life is about.
It is, and you have learned a lot, and you have taught a lot as well. Some of that's ended up in some recognitions along the way. You've been honored in numerous ways and been named the Block and Bridle Club Advisor of the Year 7 times. You've been the Block and Bridle Club Teacher of the Year, the CALS Undergraduate Advisor of the Year. I mean, you've had a tremendous impact. I know, just what are those honors, those particular honors, especially coming from youth, that and recognition there, what does that mean as you reflect back on a very prosperous career?
Well, I'll try not to get emotional. Why we do what we do in our youth livestock programs is about I'm chair of the scholarship committee, and whenever I try to talk about scholarships, I do this too. So anyway, when I think about why we do what we do in youth livestock, we're trying to develop young people so they can be contributing citizens. So the same would be undergrad. We're trying to prepare them for life. And sometimes, you can go to Rate My Professor, and I have a wide range of evaluations, but almost all of them say, this teacher wants you to be in class. They want to stretch you. And so one of my favorite positive or negative evaluations is hard but fair. So I think it's been my job to challenge young people, whether they're in 4-H or FFA or in one of my classes, to be all that they can be. You say you want to be a vet, okay, it's tough. It's tough. It's a tough profession. It's tough to get through veterinary school. It's not for the faint of heart. And, saying you want something and then committing the time to preparing for it and developing and sharpening the tools is important. So when students say that I've helped them, that's big. That's huge. Because they don't always receive your advice.
No, they don't.
at face value. And a lot of times it's years later. I've gotten letters from folks in other states that said, I didn't know then, but I know now how much this helped me, and thank you. And so you're having a bad day. God knows you need to pick up, and all of a sudden you get a letter or an email that says, you matter. And so
Amen.
That's the big deal. It's nice to matter.
Well, it is a big deal. And Dr. TenBroeck, you know that I've told you this before, but you're chairman of the scholarship committee. I got one of those scholarships, and it made an impact on me. And I won't forget that. And your impact on my wife personally with an animal science major was impactful. And so I'm a personal testament to your work and to your efforts, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate that my family appreciates that, and but also a big part of you is your faith, and you've never been ashamed of talking about your faith in Christ. Tell me a little bit about that and how that's fashioned to who you are and why you. I know why you're a hugger. It's because you love people, but you love people because you love God.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been a Christian as long as I can remember. I remember receiving Christ when we lived in Virginia. I went to a revival, and I went with one of my friends because my mom couldn't. My mom was a Tupperware dealer, so she had parties at night a lot back in the day, and so went with some friends. And I remember walking down the aisle. She said, "What if you die on the way home?" So it was kind of a fear factor, but thankfully through Vacation Bible School and Sunday school, I know that I was urged. I know the feeling of being baptized, but my Christianity grew over time, and so. I think sometimes I would let life make me too busy, and I would forget about how much I needed a relationship with Christ to get through everything. And I remember a conversation one time. He said, "Man, you can get pretty prophetic there." And so he was struggling with some things, and I said, we think we're all that. We have our pride. I can do this. I can take this on, and then life just pounds on us, and all of a sudden we find ourselves on our knees looking up.
Amen.
And I said, until you get to that point, I don't think you're going to resolve this. And so that's happened to me over and over. I let life, push my perspective away, and then I find myself on my knees. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not in this alone. And God has always brought me really good people. God always knows just what I need. Creator of the universe certainly knows better for me what the plan is than I do. And so accepting that early on and allowing myself to be open to opportunities has given me tremendous opportunities throughout my life. And so not being afraid comes from having faith that this life is temporary anyway. God is going to take you when it's time. Mm-hmm. And not before. And so that's really helped me along. And then when I first came to Florida, I became a member of Christian Faculty Fellowship. And it's a interdenominational group of faculty that have and it's called Faculty Commons now. And so being a member of Faculty Commons has helped in that it reminds me and others that you're not the only one in this ocean of academia, and in institutions of higher learning sometimes get to be extremely liberal, and I've never felt persecuted personally, but I've also felt like, oh, you have to be careful. And I'm thinking, well, I can't tell someone what to believe, but I can tell them what I believe, and that's okay. It's okay to talk about what you believe. And I've had students come in and share things with me because they know I'm a member of Faculty Commons that they would never have been comfortable sharing with me. And just having someone at a university of 50,000 people where you feel like a tiny little number, having the ability to relate to students one-on-one is a big deal. And I think being open about my faith has helped at least a few students to know that, hey, it's okay, I can talk about this. They're not going to make fun of me. We tend to be attracted. It's probably one of the problems with the church. We want to hang out with people of like mind, and when we really need to be out in the world. Amen. And so you do need to go to church, and you do need to be a part of a worshiping group where you can kind of fortify, but then you also need to go out into the world. And so the campus is a great ministry field. Amen. That just simply letting people know what you believe and how you think without beating them over the head with it, without being judgmental. I think that's an important part for anybody, but particularly where the world is, and all the anxiety, all of the stress, all the mental health issues, I think are a direct result of people feeling disconnected. That's right. And having trouble finding hope And so, preparation, if you're anxious about an exam, it's because you didn't prepare. I know that when I'm prepared for an exam, I don't feel anxious. As a teacher, if I'm prepared to go to class, I'm not anxious. But if I go to class half-cocked, I come back feeling, man, I just let those kids down. Going in life without being prepared with a foundation of faith, I don't know how people do it, honestly.
Amen. So. Amen. I appreciate you sharing that because it's so important. And some things that likewise, being prepared is being principled. There's discipline, a disciple, and then likewise on top of that is predictable. It's very not erratic or chaotic and confused. That's for sure. And
it's funny you say that because I think if you just draw a square in the air, that's me. I was always a square, and people called me predictable, and I used to, am I supposed to be offended by that? I mean, I don't know. Sometimes being predictable is not a bad thing. Doesn't mean you're not fun. It doesn't mean you don't laugh or have fun. But being predictable is being reliable.
Amen.
And being reliable, having that go-to person that is going to be the same for you every day. That's what being a Christian's all about. That's God is always there, no matter how much we mess up. He's always there. So the more I can be predictable, but also interruptible, I think that would be an adjective that would describe my attitude as a faculty member, being interruptible. It's also why I'm going to retire as an associate professor, not a full professor, because the busyness of the job makes it difficult to put together a packet for promotion. And but at the same time, I'm comfortable with the things that I've done, the people I've served, and I don't know that I've ever done my job as good as it could have been done. But I'm still married to my husband, who still loves me. Today's my anniversary, by the way.
Congratulations.
37 years. And my kids love me. My grandkids love me. Amen. And that's my legacy. My children, the students that have graduated, the kids that I've had in youth groups in church. Those are the long-term impacts that are way more important than how many publications I was able to produce.
There's no doubt about it, and that legacy is tremendous. And I'd even disagree with it being a square. I think you're well-rounded too. I think you make a good circle because
I'm more round than I used to be.
But you have that's why you've been chosen, and a lot of these things is why you've been chosen to be the 2023 Woman of the Year in Agriculture. And congratulations on it. It's well deserved.
It's humbling.
Well, it's humbling to you, but everybody around you that knows you sees how deserving it is. And it's a tremendous honor. Tell us a little bit about the nomination process and how you were selected. How that worked?
Well, it's secret. I would tell you that 2 years ago, I found a letter on my table that it was like a biology of me, and my mom had provided all this information, and I asked my husband, I said, what is all this? Because not all of it was accurate. I was like, who wrote this? And he's like, you're not supposed to see that. Oh. And so then later on, so I just let it go, and I thought, somebody's nominating something. And then that year, TenBroeck won Woman of the Year, but it wasn't me. And so last year, Lisa Hinton, I know, spearheaded all this. So she and I have been true peers for years, raising a family, trying to work, trying to accomplish things. And it's her creativity and innovation that really is responsible for the Florida State Fair program. I helped, but Lisa was the spearhead for that. So she and I have been friends a long time. I wrote a support letter for her when she was selected as Woman of the Year in Agriculture, and she did the nominations. So I found out when the commissioner called me. So, I get a phone call, and he says, hi, this is Wilton Simpson. And I'm like, I know that name. Because, I'm not expecting a phone call from the commissioner back. And all of a sudden, I go, oh. And so we had probably a 20, 30-minute conversation. Oh. He made me cry. It was a big surprise, huge honor.
It is a huge honor. It's going to be a huge platform now, too. I mean, not that you didn't have a big platform to start with, but it's also going to give you an opportunity to speak to a lot of people. What's your message going to be?
Work hard, show up. Faith, family, and friends are the most important things in life. Don't retire before you're retired. I mean, if you're gonna keep getting a paycheck, you need to keep earning it. Forgive yourself. Being a woman, I would say we have to compromise a lot, because no matter how many things we say are equal, there's still XX and XY. Biologically, we're different. Although there's lots of men with feminine characteristics and lots of women with masculine characteristics, I would say we still have biological roles. And so you feel like somebody's pulling at you from every direction a lot of times. And sometimes you have to say, okay, that's good enough. Is it as good as I'm capable of? If that's all I was doing, it's not. But is it good enough? And so that's what I'd say to the young women in profession. You're going to be called a lot of directions that men are not going to be called, for the most part. And you have to do the best you can, but be kind to yourself and ask for help. That's a lesson I had a hard time learning. I thought I was totally responsible, therefore I shouldn't have to ask for help. But there's a reason God made more than one, you know, and people are in our lives for a reason. And by not asking for help from others, you're depriving others the privilege of being a part of what you're doing. And even if they don't do it as well as you might do it, they learn from their mistakes, and they have you there as a safety net. So I would say, as a parent and as a teacher, we have to allow our next generation to be tasked and challenged, and allow them to make mistakes and mess up, so that they can have the opportunity to learn and replace us and do better than we did. So forgiving yourself, knowing that you're not going to measure up in everything every day the way maybe you'd like to, and ask for help, and know that the Creator loves you.
That message resonates very well. Florida Farm Bureau's theme for 2024 is Tied to Ag. In your career and your recent honor as the 2023 Woman of the Year in Agriculture, can you just summarize how you are tied to ag?
Yeah, in some ways I feel like the wagon was going down the road and it had a rope hanging on the back, and I grabbed on and held on with two hands, because I wasn't born to it. I was exposed to it. And I jumped in at every opportunity, and so being involved in education and outreach and youth work is really an honor and a privilege. And I think when your livelihood and the survival of your family depends on things like weather and markets, I mean, and so I found, of all the industries, the ag industry has, in my experience, my opinion only, a higher percentage of believers than a lot of other industries. And maybe it's selfish because we do it out of necessity, but I think we've seen miracle after miracle after miracle, and faith without seeing things is really a true testimony. But when you see miracles, you can't deny your faith. Amen. And deny what's real. And so I would say my opportunities to be involved in agriculture have made me better, and my desire to maintain a generation of folks that want to be involved has only been made stronger every year. And as our world changes, we have to keep reminding folks that without agriculture, we can't be the strong country that we are. Maintaining a healthy environment, being good stewards of the land that we have, good stewards of animals, and using tools properly. One of the big things I teach repro, so we have assisted reproductive technologies, and we can do ICSI, which is intracytoplasmic sperm injection, and we can split embryos, and we can do pre-implantation genetic manipulation, but the take-home message is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And though as we develop tools with basic research in animal science or in row crops, we also have to step back and look at the big picture and what are the ripple effects of the things that we're discovering, and how do we use those tools for the betterment of not just this generation but generations to come, and how do we remain stewards of the blessings that God has given us. I think increase in knowledge is also a gift from God, and but just because you can doesn't mean you should. That's an important lesson as we look at technology and communication and, I don't know, social media, telephone, but we're video games. There's a lot of things we can do with our time, and sometimes stepping back from something just because it's there is healthy as well.
Dr. TenBroeck, thank you for spending some time with us today. Thank you so much for what you have done in this industry, the livestock industry, in young people's lives, in older people's lives as well. Thank you for being obedient to the Lord. Thank you for grabbing that rope that took that wagon down the road, because it's made a positive impact on a lot of people. And congratulations on being the 2023 Woman of the Year in Agriculture in Florida. Thank you so much for who you are.
Thank you so much.